My name is Victoria Hayes, but everyone calls me Tori. I'm 35 years old, and last Thursday, my entire life changed when I checked my lottery ticket and discovered I'd won $52 million. My hands trembled as I stared at those 6 numbers that matched perfectly. After the initial shock wore off, a strange thought crossed my mind: I would tell absolutely no one about this money. You see, I have a complicated history with my family when it comes to finances. Before that fateful Thursday, my life was painfully ordinary. I worked as a financial analyst at a small consulting firm in Seattle, making just enough to live somewhat comfortably but never enough to feel secure. My apartment was a modest studio in the outskirts of the city, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every morning, I would wake at 6, make my coffee, and start my day with the persistent worry of bills and deadlines hanging over my head. The job was demanding, with 60-hour work weeks becoming the norm rather than the exception, especially during quarterly reports. My family situation was complicated, to say the least. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Hayes, divorced when I was 13, and both remarried within 3 years. My father, Thomas, a high school chemistry teacher, married Jennifer, a real estate broker with expensive tastes and an even more expensive lifestyle. My mother, Margaret, found love with Gerald, a successful business owner who had more money than my father but kept a tight grip on every penny. I have 2 siblings. My younger brother, Kevin, is 31 and has always been the golden child. He graduated from an Ivy League university, married a cardiologist named Amanda, and now lives in a beautiful house in the suburbs with their 2 perfect children. Then there's my older sister, Rachel, 37, who despite her charm and intelligence has never quite figured out her life. She bounces from job to job, relationship to relationship, and has made borrowing money from family members something of an art form. The pattern was always the same: desperate call, emotional plea, promise to pay it back, then radio silence until the next crisis. Extended family was no less complicated. My Aunt Carolyn, my mother's younger sister, was perhaps the only genuine person in our family circle. Despite living paycheck to paycheck as an elementary school teacher, she always found ways to show up when it mattered. She drove an ancient Civic that made alarming noises, lived in a small apartment filled with books and plants, and never complained about her circumstances. In stark contrast was my Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, who had married wealthy and never let anyone forget it. She spent holidays critiquing everyone's life choices and making backhanded comments about my career, apartment, and perpetually single status. My cousin Brandon, her son, had inherited her entitlement but none of her financial success, and had a gambling problem that the family pretended not to notice. My history with financial assistance in the family had left me jaded. When Rachel needed $4,000 for rehab 2 years ago, I emptied my modest savings account to help her, only to discover months later that she'd never actually gone to treatment. When Kevin needed help with his wedding costs, I put $1,500 on my credit card that he promised to pay back after the honeymoon. For years later, I was still waiting. When my father needed a loan to repair his roof after a storm, I sent what I could, only to see photos of him and Jennifer vacationing in Hawaii the following month. The only person who knew the full extent of these betrayals was my best friend Isabella. We'd met in college, and unlike most relationships in my life, ours had remained constant. Isabella worked as a physical therapist, understood struggle, and never judged my complicated feelings about my family. She was the voice of reason when I felt myself becoming bitter, reminding me that not everyone was out to take advantage of me. At work, things weren't much better. My boss, Gregory, had a habit of taking credit for my analyses during meetings with clients. My colleague Marcus consistently left early, leaving me to pick up his slack, yet somehow always managed to get the recognition I deserved. Despite being underappreciated, I kept my head down and continued to work diligently, hoping someday it would pay off. Buying lottery tickets was my one small indulgence, a weekly ritual that my family loved to tease me about. Every Wednesday, I would stop at the corner store and spend $15 on tickets. My mother called it a tax on people who can't do math. My brother joked that I should just give him the money directly instead of wasting it. My father lectured me about probability and statistics. But there was something hopeful about those tickets, a tiny chance at freedom that I couldn't bring myself to give up, even as years passed without winning more than $30 here and there. I had dreams, of course. I wanted to travel, to see places beyond the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to go back to school, maybe get a master's degree in something I was actually passionate about. I wanted to have enough savings that an unexpected car repair wouldn't send me into a financial tailspin. But these dreams seemed increasingly distant as I approached my mid-30s, still paying off student loans and carrying a small but persistent credit card debt that never seemed to diminish despite my careful budgeting. Each month was a careful balancing act of bills, groceries, and the occasional dinner out with Isabella. I clipped coupons, compared prices, and knew exactly which store had the best deal on everything from toilet paper to coffee. I drove an 11-year-old Honda that made a concerning noise when it rained but couldn't afford to replace it. I had mastered the art of appearing perfectly fine while constantly calculating costs in my head, wondering if I could afford to say yes to an invitation or if I needed to invent an excuse to stay home. This was my life before everything changed, ordinary, sometimes difficult, occasionally lonely, but stable in its own way. I had no idea how a single piece of paper was about to completely upend everything I thought I knew about myself and the people I called family. The day I bought the winning ticket was actually my 35th birthday. I'd just finished a particularly grueling week at work where Gregory had once again taken credit for my financial forecast that saved a major client hundreds of thousands of dollars. I stopped at Sam's Corner Market as I did every Wednesday, but this time with a slight variation in my routine. "Happy birthday, Tori!" Sam called out as I entered. Sam was a kind older man who'd owned the store for over 30 years. He knew all his regular customers by name and always had a friendly word to share. "Thanks, Sam." "The usual, please, and maybe one extra for good luck," I replied, handing him $20 instead of my typical $15. "Birthday splurge, huh? Maybe today's your lucky day," he said with a wink as he handed me my tickets. Instead of my usual quick pick, I decided on a whim to choose my own numbers. I selected my birth month and day, 4 and 17. My mother's birthday, 8. My father's birthday, 23. Carolyn's birthday, 11. And Isabella's birthday, 32. 6 numbers that represented the most important people in my life, even those who had disappointed me. That evening, I ordered takeout from my favorite Indian restaurant, opened a bottle of wine Isabella had given me as a birthday gift, and settled in for a quiet night alone. The lottery drawing was at 8 o'clock, but I barely paid attention as I scrolled through social media, seeing posts from acquaintances enjoying far more exciting birthday celebrations than mine. At 8:30, I remembered the tickets and lazily picked up my phone to check the numbers, expecting nothing as usual. The first number matched, 4. I smiled slightly. The second matched, 17. My heart rate picked up just a bit. Third number, 8. Fourth, 23. By now, my palms were sweating. Fifth number, 11. I was holding my breath. Sixth and final number, 32. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity. This couldn't be right. I must have read something wrong. I checked again. And again. I turned on the television and rewound to the live drawing. I watched as each of my numbers appeared on the screen, one after another. My hands shook so badly I dropped the remote. "No way," I whispered to the empty apartment. "No way." According to the lottery website, I was the sole winner of $52 million. After taxes, it would be somewhere around $31 million, an unfathomable sum for someone who'd been excited earlier that day about a 15% off coupon for laundry detergent. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I spent hours researching lottery winners online. What I found was disturbing: stories of winners whose lives fell apart after their windfall. Families torn apart by greed. Friends and distant relatives appearing out of nowhere with sob stories and outstretched hands. Winners who were bankrupt within 5 years, more miserable than before they'd won. One article called the lottery the quickest path to losing everything you care about. As the sun rose, I made my decision. I would claim the money, but I would tell no one. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even Isabella. At least not right away. I needed time to process this, to make a plan, to understand what this money would mean for my life before everyone else tried to tell me what to do with it. That morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 4 years and made an appointment with Daniel Garrison, an attorney specializing in financial planning and estate law. His office was in a downtown high-rise, and as I sat in the waiting room in my ordinary clothes, clutching my purse with the winning ticket inside, I felt like an imposter. "Ms. Hayes?" Daniel greeted me, extending his hand. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. "What can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath and placed the ticket on his desk. I need to know how to claim this without anyone finding out it was me. His eyes widened briefly as he examined the ticket. Then he nodded professionally. "I see. Well, you've come to the right place." Over the next 3 hours, Daniel explained my options. In our state, lottery winners could claim prizes through trusts or legal entities that would keep their identities private. He outlined the process of setting up a blind trust, how taxes would work, and the importance of assembling a team of financial advisors to help manage such a large sum. The biggest mistake winners make, he told me, is telling too many people too quickly. Once that happens, there's no going back. I nodded, relieved that my instinct had been correct. I want to do this right. I don't want this money to ruin my life. As I left Daniel's office with a folder full of documents and a list of next steps, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of, yet I couldn't share this life-changing news with anyone. I would be living a double life, pretending to be the same struggling financial analyst while secretly being a multimillionaire. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with Daniel to establish the trust, claim the winnings, and set up investment accounts. We created a comprehensive financial plan that would ensure I'd never have to worry about money again, even if I lived to be 100. The money was real now, sitting in accounts under my control. Yet my day-to-day life remained unchanged. I still went to work, still complained about bills with coworkers, still drove my old Honda. The secrecy was starting to weigh on me. I found myself wondering about my family. Would they be happy for me if they knew? Would they respect my boundaries, or would they see me as nothing more than a walking ATM? The questions haunted me, and gradually an idea began to form. What if there was a way to find out how my family would react to my newfound wealth without actually revealing it? What if I could test their character before deciding who to share my secret with? The plan crystallized one night as I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I would create a scenario where I needed financial help. Not a huge amount, but enough to be significant. I would approach each family member with the same story, the same request, and see who would help me without the prospect of gaining anything in return. Only then would I know who deserved to be part of my new life. The next day, I met with Daniel again to ensure my finances were properly secured before proceeding with my plan. We'd established a diverse investment portfolio, set up trusts for future charitable giving, and created a modest personal account that would allow me to access funds without raising suspicion. The bulk of the money was safely invested, untouchable by anyone but me. "Everything is in order, Victoria," Daniel assured me, sliding a folder across his polished desk. "Your financial future is secure. You could stop working tomorrow if you wanted to." The thought was tempting, but I knew an abrupt lifestyle change would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. I think I'll stay at my job for now, I replied. At least until I figure some things out. That evening, I invited Isabella over for dinner. As we sat on my small balcony with glasses of wine, I decided to share part of my plan with her. I couldn't keep everything bottled up, and I trusted her more than anyone. I'm thinking about conducting a sort of experiment with my family, I began carefully. Isabella raised an eyebrow. What kind of experiment? I took a deep breath. I'm going to tell them I lost my job and need financial help. Just to see who actually cares enough to help me when I need it. Isabella's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Tori, that seems manipulative. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of being the only one who helps when others need it, I said, not quite meeting her eyes. I want to know who would be there for me if the tables were turned. But lying to test people, that doesn't sound like you, Isabella set down her wine glass. Why not just ask them how they feel about you? Have an honest conversation? I laughed without humor. Right, because my family is so great at honest conversations. You know how they are, Isabella. You've seen how they treat me. Still, this feels wrong. What are you trying to prove? I'm not trying to prove anything, I insisted, though that wasn't entirely true. I just want to know who actually cares about me versus who sees me as a resource. Isabella shook her head. I think you're going to hurt yourself more than anyone else with this. But I know that look in your eye, you've already made up your mind. She was right. I'd spent the day crafting my story, making sure it was believable but not so dramatic that it would raise suspicion. I would tell everyone that the consulting firm I worked for had suddenly shut down after losing its biggest clients. I would say I needed $6,000 to cover rent and medical expenses until I found a new position. It was a significant amount, but not outrageous, and certainly not beyond the means of most of my family members. I made a list of everyone I would approach, my mother Margaret and stepfather Gerald. My father Thomas and stepmother Jennifer. My brother Kevin and his wife Amanda. My sister Rachel. My aunt Carolyn. My aunt Patricia. And my cousin Brandon. 9 people, all of whom had turned to me for help at some point, all of whom I'd supported either financially or emotionally when they needed it. The next day, I practiced my story with Isabella, who reluctantly agreed to help despite her misgivings. You need to sound genuinely distressed but not desperate, she advised. And have specific details ready about the company closing. They might ask questions. I nodded, taking notes. I'll say the CEO had been embezzling funds and the company is under investigation. That would explain why it happened so suddenly and why I might not get my final paycheck. And what about your job search? They'll ask about that. I've been applying everywhere, but the job market is tight, especially for specialized financial analysis positions. I have some interviews lined up, but nothing definite yet. And my emergency fund is depleted from some recent medical tests. I'd thought through every detail, creating a scenario that would elicit sympathy without raising too many questions. As I finalized my plan, I felt a twinge of guilt. Was Isabella right? Was this manipulative and wrong? But then I remembered all the times I'd emptied my savings to help these same people, often at great personal cost, and my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about testing them. It was about protecting myself and my future. With a mix of anticipation and dread, I picked up my phone and made the first call. It was time to find out who my real family was. I decided to call my mother first. Margaret had always prided herself on being a nurturing parent, frequently reminding us how she'd sacrificed her own dreams to raise her children. If anyone would help, I thought it would be her. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. "Hi, Mom," I said, intentionally making my voice sound strained. "Tori, is everything okay? You sound upset." I launched into my prepared story, telling her about the company suddenly closing, the lost wages, and my precarious financial situation. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing change, growing more concerned with each detail. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," she said when I finished. "Have you applied for unemployment? What about your emergency fund?" I explained that unemployment would take weeks to process and that my emergency fund had been depleted by recent medical tests for some concerning symptoms. I didn't specify what the symptoms were, allowing her imagination to fill in the blanks. "I hate to ask this, Mom, but I need help. About $6,000 to cover rent and medical bills until I can find something new. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Tori, you know Gerald and I just made a large investment in that rental property. We're pretty cash poor right now." Her voice took on a slightly defensive tone. "Have you asked your father? Or Kevin? Amanda makes good money at the hospital." I was hoping to avoid asking Dad, I said truthfully, and Kevin has the kids and their private school tuition. "Well, let me talk to Gerald and see what we can do," she said finally. "But I can't promise anything. You know how tight he is with money, especially when it comes to, well, you know." I did know. Gerald had never considered me his responsibility, making it clear from the beginning that his money was for my mother and any children they might have had together. They never did. "Sure, Mom. Just let me know as soon as you can. The rent is due next week." "I will, honey. And I'm so sorry about your job. These things always work out for the best, though. Maybe this is a sign you should look at changing careers to something more stable." After hanging up, I noted her response in a journal I'd started for this purpose. She'd expressed concern but immediately looked for ways to pass the responsibility to someone else. She hadn't outright refused, but I suspected her conversation with Gerald would conveniently result in them being unable to help. The next day, I met my father, Thomas, for coffee. I chose a public place, thinking he might be less likely to react negatively in such a setting. "You look tired," was his greeting as I sat down across from him. I gave him a weak smile and launched into my story. His face remained impassive as I spoke, occasionally nodding or frowning at certain details. When I finished by asking for help with the $6,000, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Victoria, I've always taught you about financial responsibility," he began, slipping into his teacher voice. "This is exactly why I told you to keep 6 months of expenses saved at all times." "What happened to that plan?" "Life happened, Dad," I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Medical bills, car repairs. Not everyone can afford to set aside that much money." He sighed heavily. "And now you expect others to bail you out. What about your spending habits? Do you really need that apartment in that neighborhood? What about your streaming subscriptions?" For the next 20 minutes, he lectured me about financial planning, the job market, and the importance of living below one's means. Not once did he offer any actual help. "I'd love to help you, Tori, but Jennifer and I are focusing on our retirement right now. We can't afford to dip into those funds. It would be financially irresponsible." He patted my hand patronizingly. "This will be a good learning experience for you. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we make necessary changes." I nodded, fighting back tears that were only partly for show. Even expecting this response, it hurt to hear him dismiss my needs so easily. My brother Kevin was next. I drove to his beautiful suburban home on a Saturday afternoon. His wife Amanda was at the hospital, giving us privacy to talk. "Tori, what a surprise," he exclaimed when he opened the door. "The kids are at their gymnastics lessons. Come in." His house was immaculate, with expensive furniture and framed professional family photos on every wall. As we sat in his gourmet kitchen sipping coffee from his commercial-grade espresso machine, I told him about my situation. "Oh my God, that's awful," he gasped, reaching across the granite island to squeeze my hand. "I can't believe they would just close like that. Poor you." His sympathy seemed genuine, and for a moment I felt hopeful. Then I mentioned needing to borrow $6,000. "Oh," he said, his expression shifting slightly. "Well, this actually isn't a great time. We just bought the new Tesla last month, and the kids' tuition was due. Plus, we're planning a trip to Europe this summer." He glanced around nervously. "Amanda handles most of our finances, and she's really strict about our budget." "I understand," I said quietly. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." I know," he said quickly. "Let me talk to Amanda and see what we can do. Maybe we can help with a smaller amount? Or maybe you could move in with us temporarily. The guest room is being used for storage right now, but we could clear it out." I thanked him for the offer but explained that moving would be difficult with my job search centered in the city. He promised to call me after speaking with Amanda, but the way he avoided eye contact told me all I needed to know. My sister Rachel was perhaps the most disappointing. After sending her a detailed text about my situation, she responded with a brief message, "That sucks, sis. Really tight right now myself. We'll call you later." She never did. My follow-up messages went unanswered, and when I tried calling her directly, the calls went straight to voicemail. This from the same sister who'd borrowed thousands from me over the years, always with tearful promises of repayment that never materialized. My stepmother Jennifer was blunt when I called her, not bothering with even a pretense of sympathy. "Victoria, I'm sure this is difficult, but Thomas and I are not in a position to help. Perhaps this is an opportunity for you to learn better financial management skills. Have you considered downsizing your apartment or getting a roommate?" When I pointed out that I'd helped them with repairs to their vacation cabin last year, she bristled. "That was different. That was a family property that you also enjoy using." The fact that I'd only been invited to the cabin once in 6 years apparently didn't matter. My stepfather Gerald was even worse. "You're not my daughter," he said plainly when I called. "I've supported your mother for years, but your financial problems are your own. Perhaps you should have chosen a more lucrative career path." My cousin Brandon initially seemed sympathetic, promising to definitely help out. He even suggested meeting for lunch to give me a check. But when the day came, he texted an hour before saying something had come up and he'd reschedule. He never did, and eventually stopped responding to my messages altogether. Aunt Patricia's response was perhaps the least surprising but still painful. "Well, Victoria, I always said that company of yours seemed unstable. I told your father you should have taken that job at the bank after college, but no one listens to me." She then proceeded to tell me about all the financial troubles other family members had experienced and how they'd overcome them without begging for handouts. By that evening, I'd heard from Kevin that Aunt Patricia was telling everyone about my financial irresponsibility. After a week of rejections, half-promises, and outright silence, I was emotionally exhausted. The experiment had confirmed my worst fears about my family, but the reality was still painful to accept. 8 people who'd repeatedly asked for and received my help over the years couldn't, or wouldn't, return the favor when I needed them. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Carolyn. "Tori, honey, I just heard from your mother about the job. Are you okay?" Her voice was warm with genuine concern. I hadn't actually reached out to Carolyn yet, planning to call her the next day. The fact that she'd called me first after hearing about my situation secondhand spoke volumes. "I'm hanging in there," I said, the emotion in my voice now entirely real. "Listen, I want to help. Can we meet for lunch tomorrow?" My treat, of course. The next day, we met at a small diner near her apartment. Carolyn looked exactly as she always did, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a cardigan with mismatched buttons. She hugged me tightly before we sat down. "I'm so sorry about your job, sweetheart. That company never deserved you anyway." As we ate, she asked thoughtful questions about my job search and offered to reach out to some former colleagues who had connections in the business world. Then, after our plates had been cleared, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to take this," she said, sliding it across the table. "It's $4,000. I know it's not the full amount you need, but it should help with the rent at least." I stared at the envelope in shock. "Carolyn, I can't take this. This is too much." "Nonsense. Family helps family. And I want you to know something else." She reached across the table and took my hand. "If you need a place to stay to save on rent, my sofa pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need to." Tears filled my eyes, and this time they were completely genuine. "Thank you," I whispered, overwhelmed by her generosity. "Now, don't you worry about paying this back right away," she continued. "Get back on your feet first. Find a job you actually like this time. Life's too short to work somewhere that doesn't appreciate you." As we left the diner, Carolyn hugged me again. "You're going to be okay, Tori. You're smart and capable. This is just a bump in the road." Driving home, I clutched the envelope containing $4,000, more money than I knew Carolyn could comfortably spare. The contrast between her response and the rest of my family's couldn't have been more stark. The only person who'd offered genuine help was the one with the least to give. After meeting with Carolyn, I did some research that left me stunned. $4,000 represented nearly all of her savings, and I discovered that she'd been quietly dealing with complications from type 2 diabetes. Her medication costs had recently increased, and she'd been picking up extra tutoring work to make ends meet. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. Carolyn, who had so little, had given me almost everything she had, without hesitation or conditions. Meanwhile, my mother, who'd recently spent $10,000 on a kitchen renovation, couldn't spare $6,000 to help her daughter with rent and medical bills. The next day, I invited Carolyn to my apartment for dinner. As she settled onto my worn couch, I noticed for the first time how tired she looked, the fine lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. "Carolyn, I need to tell you something," I began, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Her expression remained open, curious rather than concerned. "What is it, honey?" "I didn't lose my job. The company is fine. I still have my position." The words tumbled out quickly. I made up the story to see who in the family would help me if I needed it. Carolyn was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. Are you angry with me?" I asked suddenly, afraid of losing the one genuine relationship I'd discovered through this experiment. She considered the question. "No, not angry. Sad maybe, sad that you felt you needed to test people this way." She took a sip of her tea. "But I understand why you did it. Our family hasn't always been kind to you. You were the only one who offered to help," I told her. "Everyone else had excuses or just ignored me entirely." Carolyn sighed. "People show you who they are when giving becomes inconvenient." I learned that lesson the hard way myself. What do you mean? She set down her cup and folded her hands in her lap. My ex-husband, Michael. Did I ever tell you why we really divorced? I shook my head. The family story had always been vague, something about growing apart. I came into a small inheritance when my grandmother died. About $60,000, not a fortune, but significant for us at the time. Michael immediately had all these plans for the money, mainly investing in his friend's business ventures. She smiled ruefully. I wanted to save it for our future, maybe buy a small house eventually. We fought about it for months. What happened? One day, I discovered he'd forged my signature and withdrawn most of the money. By the time I found out, it was gone, invested in a restaurant that failed within a year. She shook her head at the memory. When I confronted him, do you know what he said? That it was our money, not just mine, and he had as much right to it as I did. As if my name on the inheritance meant nothing. I was shocked. I had no idea. The family preferred the growing apart story. Less messy. She reached for my hand. The point is, I learned that some people see you as a resource rather than a person. And it's a painful lesson. I'm so sorry that happened to you, I said, squeezing her hand. It was a long time ago, but it taught me something important about money and relationships. She looked at me intently. Money doesn't just reveal who others truly are, Tori. It reveals who we are too. How we use it, how we share it, how we talk about it. It's a powerful mirror. Her words resonated deeply. In that moment, I made a decision. Carolyn, there's something else I need to tell you. Something big. I took a deep breath. I won the lottery 4 weeks ago. $52 million. Her eyes widened, but she remained silent, waiting for me to continue. I haven't told anyone else. Not my parents, not Kevin or Rachel, not even Isabella. You're the first to know. Oh, Tori, she breathed. That's life-changing. I know. And that's why I did this test. I needed to know who would be there for me without knowing about the money. Carolyn nodded slowly. I understand that. But what will you do now? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The money is secure, and I have good financial advisors. But I don't know how to handle the family. Carolyn considered this. You know you don't owe anyone anything, Tori. Not even me. But I want to help you, I insisted. Your medical expenses, a better apartment. Whatever you need. She smiled gently. I don't need anything from you, sweetheart. I'm happy with my life. My apartment is small, but it's full of things I love. My car runs most of the time. I have my students and my books. And now this wonderful secret with my favorite niece. She patted my hand. Just knowing you're secure and happy would be enough for me. Her selflessness brought tears to my eyes. Here was someone who'd given me almost everything she had when she thought I needed it, and now was asking for nothing in return when she knew I had millions. As we continued talking into the night, the contrast between Carolyn and the rest of my family became even more stark. While I'd been conducting my experiment, word had spread through the family about my supposed financial troubles. Instead of prompting concern, it had mainly generated gossip and judgment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Heard you asked Kevin for money too. You should have told me you were asking everyone. Feels like you're playing us against each other. Another came from my father. Jennifer tells me you've been calling everyone for handouts. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior I warned you about. The family had turned my request for help into evidence of my character flaws rather than an opportunity to show compassion. And in doing so, they'd revealed everything I needed to know about the true nature of our relationships. The morning after my conversation with Carolyn, I met with Daniel to discuss my long-term financial plans. Now that I had clarity about my family relationships, I could make decisions about my future with open eyes. I want to set up a trust for my Aunt Carolyn, I told him. Something that will cover her medical expenses and provide her with a comfortable retirement, but in a way that feels like a gift rather than charity. She's very proud. Daniel nodded, making notes. We can structure it as a family trust that provides a monthly stipend. She wouldn't have to manage a large sum all at once, which can be overwhelming for someone not used to wealth. Perfect. And I want to buy her a small house near wherever I decide to live. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable and accessible for someone with health issues. We spent the next hour discussing investment strategies, charitable foundations, and my own living situation. I decided to give notice at my consulting job and focus on establishing a non-profit organization aimed at helping elderly people living alone, inspired by Carolyn's situation and the many others like hers. What about the rest of your family? Daniel asked cautiously. Do you plan to tell them about the winnings? I shook my head. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I do want to arrange a family meeting to clear the air about my financial troubles. Later that day, I called Isabella and finally told her the truth about everything, the lottery win and the family experiment. After her initial shock, she understood why I'd kept it secret. So what now? She asked. Are you going to become one of those eccentric millionaires who still clips coupons and drives a beat-up car? I laughed. No, but I'm not going to suddenly start buying Ferraris either. I want this money to mean something, to do good, starting with Carolyn. She deserves it. Isabella agreed. And what about everyone else? The ones who failed your test? I'm still figuring that out. I've called a family meeting for this weekend. I told them I have an important announcement. When Sunday arrived, I was surprised to see everyone show up at my apartment. My mother and Gerald, my father and Jennifer, Kevin and Amanda, even Rachel, who'd been ignoring my calls for weeks. Aunt Patricia arrived with a disapproving frown already in place. Aunt Carolyn came last, giving me a secret smile as she entered. As everyone settled into my small living room, looking around with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment, I stood before them feeling strangely calm. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know there have been rumors going around about my financial situation, and I wanted to address them directly. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Rachel suddenly became very interested in her phone. Kevin and Amanda exchanged glances. The truth is, I'm fine. I haven't lost my job. The company is doing well. In fact, I've been offered a promotion with significantly better pay and benefits. This was technically true. I had just appointed myself executive director of my new foundation with a modest salary. Well, that's wonderful news, my mother said with obvious relief. We've all been so worried. I noticed several faces relax around the room. They'd come expecting either to be asked for money again or perhaps to stage some sort of intervention about my financial habits. Instead, they were getting good news that required nothing from them. So why all the drama about needing money? My father asked, his tone accusatory. Why ask everyone for help if you had a job lined up? I met his gaze steadily. The promotion came through recently. And when I thought I was in trouble, I reached out to my family. That's what family is supposed to be for, right? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Well, we all have our own financial commitments, Jennifer said defensively. It's not always possible to help, even when we want to. Of course, I agreed. We all have to make choices about our priorities. I turned to Rachel. Speaking of which, Rachel, I noticed you never responded to my messages when I needed help. Yet you had no problem asking me for $4,000 last year for your rehab. She had the grace to look embarrassed. And you didn't even call me back, I pointed out. That would have been free. The meeting continued in this vein, with me calmly but firmly addressing the hypocrisy and absence of support I'd experienced. No one admitted any wrongdoing. There were excuses, justifications, and even some attempts to turn the blame back on me for making everyone feel guilty. As they filed out after an uncomfortable hour, I felt a strange sense of closure. I hadn't told them about the lottery win, but I'd stood up for myself in a way I never had before. The money had given me something perhaps more valuable than wealth itself, the courage to see my relationships clearly and to set boundaries accordingly. Carolyn stayed behind after everyone left, helping me clean up the coffee cups and plates. You did well, she said quietly. That couldn't have been easy. It was actually easier than I expected, I replied. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of disappointing them because I realized their opinion of me was never based on who I really am. Carolyn smiled. That's a powerful realization. So what happens next? Next, I said, we start looking at houses for both of us. 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable from the day I'd first discovered those matching lottery numbers. I'd moved into a beautiful but modest home in a quiet neighborhood with a garden that brought me joy each morning. Just 4 blocks away was Carolyn's new house, a single-story craftsman with wide doorways to accommodate her walker on the days her diabetes made walking difficult. My non-profit organization, Second Family, had grown beyond my expectations. We provided companionship, home repairs, and financial assistance to elderly people living alone, with a special focus on those estranged from their families. The work was rewarding in a way my consulting career had never been, and we'd already helped over 300 seniors in our city. Isabella had eventually joined the organization as our outreach coordinator, bringing her physical therapy expertise and compassionate nature to our mission. She and I still had our weekly wine nights, though now they took place on my comfortable patio rather than in my cramped apartment. My relationship with my family had shifted into something more distant but also more honest. I maintained occasional contact with most of them, polite birthday calls and holiday gatherings, but the pretense of closeness had fallen away. Without the expectation of emotional intimacy that had never actually existed, our interactions became less painful. None of them knew about my lottery winnings. As far as they were concerned, I'd simply found success with my new career in nonprofit management. They seemed to accept this explanation without much curiosity about the details, which told me everything I needed to know about their interest in my life. There had been moments of temptation to reveal the truth, particularly when Rachel called asking for money for a new business venture, or when Kevin complained about the cost of his kitchen renovation. But each time I remembered the silence when I'd needed help, and the choice became clear. Interestingly, there had been occasions when family members genuinely needed assistance. When my father had a minor stroke and faced unexpected medical bills, I anonymously paid them through the hospital's patient assistance fund. When my cousin Brandon finally entered rehab for his gambling addiction, I made an anonymous donation to cover his treatment. They never knew the source of these gifts, and I preferred it that way. Carolyn and I had dinner together at least twice a week. Her health had improved dramatically with proper medical care and less financial stress. She'd retired from teaching but volunteered at a literacy program 4 days a week, still sharing her love of books with children who needed it. You know what still amazes me? She said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. How differently everything could have turned out if you'd announced your lottery win right away. I nodded, considering this alternate reality. The family would have suddenly become very attentive and loving, I imagine. And you would never have known what was real, Carolyn added. That knowledge, painful as it was, gave you freedom. She was right. The experiment had been painful but illuminating. It had shown me who deserved a place in my life and who didn't. It had revealed the true nature of relationships I'd spent years trying to strengthen despite their fundamental imbalance. The greatest lesson I'd learned was not about others, but about myself. Before the lottery, I'd defined my worth by what I could give to others, constantly trying to earn love through sacrifice and generosity. I'd allowed myself to be used because I believed that was what family meant, what love required. Now I understood that real love, the kind Carolyn had shown me, didn't keep a balance sheet. It gave freely without expectation of return, but it also respected boundaries and dignity. It was honest and consistent, present in good times and bad. I'd initially kept my winning secret out of fear, worried that money would corrupt my relationships. What I hadn't anticipated was how the secret would clarify them instead, stripping away pretense and revealing truth. The money hadn't changed who anyone was. It had simply illuminated who they'd been all along. 1 year after the lottery win, I stood in the newly constructed community center that Second Family had built. The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, and I was doing a final walkthrough with Isabella and Carolyn. The center featured a commercial kitchen where elderly community members could take cooking classes, a library filled with large print books, a medical suite offering free health screenings, and a beautiful common area where people could gather for companionship. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Carolyn said, squeezing my arm as we looked at the portrait wall featuring photos of the seniors we'd helped. I smiled. Carolyn was right. My maternal grandmother, who'd passed away when I was 16, had always emphasized the importance of community and service. She would have loved this. "There's someone here to see you," Isabella said, nodding toward the entrance where a woman in her 60s stood hesitantly. I walked over to greet her. "Can I help you?" "Are you Victoria Hayes?" she asked. "The woman who started Second Family?" I nodded. "My name is Dorothy Chin. I read about your organization in the newspaper." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "My husband passed away 6 months ago, and I've been so lonely. My children live across the country, and I just needed to talk to someone who understands." I took her hand. "Come in. Let me show you around and introduce you to some people." As I walked Dorothy through the center, introducing her to volunteers and other seniors who'd found community here, I felt a profound sense of purpose. This was what the money was meant for, not lavish vacations or expensive cars, but creating spaces where people could find connection and dignity. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Tori, I saw an article about your nonprofit in the Tribune. I had no idea you were doing such important work." There was genuine admiration in her voice, something I'd rarely heard from her. "Thank you, Mom. It's been incredibly fulfilling. I was thinking, maybe Gerald and I could volunteer sometime? If you'd want our help." I paused, considering. My first instinct was to refuse, to keep this part of my life separate from my family. But then I remembered something Carolyn had told me: people can change, but only if you give them the chance. "I'd like that," I said. "We're always looking for volunteers." Over the following months, my mother and Gerald began volunteering at the center one afternoon a week. At first, it was awkward, my mother clearly uncomfortable with manual labor and Gerald stiff in his interactions with the seniors. But gradually, something shifted. I watched my mother spend an hour listening to an elderly woman talk about losing her husband, offering tissues and empathy without trying to fix anything. I saw Gerald patiently teaching a senior how to use a smartphone to video chat with distant grandchildren. They weren't perfect, and our relationship would never be what I'd once hoped for. But they were trying, and that counted for something. My father and Jennifer also reached out eventually, offering a substantial donation to the organization. I accepted it, adding their names to the donor wall without fanfare. Kevin and Amanda brought their children to volunteer during spring break, teaching them about service and compassion. It wasn't the relationship I'd once wanted with my brother, but it was something genuine. Rachel, on the other hand, remained distant. She'd send a brief congratulations text about the center but showed no real interest in my work. I'd made peace with that. Some relationships simply couldn't be salvaged, and that was okay. The only person who knew the full truth about my lottery win remained Carolyn. We'd kept that secret carefully guarded, and I had no plans to reveal it to anyone else. One evening, as Carolyn and I sat in my garden watching fireflies dance between the flowers, she asked a question I'd been pondering myself. Do you ever regret not telling your family about the money? Maybe things would have been different if you'd been honest from the start. I considered this carefully. I don't think so. The test wasn't about punishing them, it was about protecting myself. I needed to know who would love me without conditions before I could trust anyone with that information. And now? Carolyn asked. Do you think you could tell them? I shook my head. What would be the point? It would only change how they see me, not who they actually are. And I like my life the way it is now, authentic relationships built on mutual care rather than financial obligation. Carolyn nodded. You've built something beautiful here, Tori. Not just the organization, but your life. You've chosen peace over performance. Her words resonated deeply. That's exactly what I'd done, chosen to build a life that felt true to myself rather than constantly performing for approval I'd never receive. The lottery money had given me financial freedom, yes. But more importantly, it had given me the clarity to see my relationships honestly and the courage to reshape my life accordingly. I thought about all the lottery winners I'd read about in those panicked hours after discovering my win, people whose lives had been destroyed by sudden wealth. Their mistake hadn't been winning the lottery. It had been letting the money change them rather than using it as a tool for insight and growth. My life now was rich in ways that had nothing to do with my bank account. I had purpose through my foundation, genuine connection with Carolyn and Isabella, and hard-won understanding of my own worth that no external validation could shake. Perhaps most importantly, I had peace. The constant anxiety about finances that had been my lifelong companion was gone, but so too was the desperate need for approval from people incapable of giving it. I'd built a life aligned with my values rather than my insecurities. What are you thinking about? Carolyn asked, noticing my contemplative silence. That the real inheritance wasn't the money, I said slowly. It was the permission to finally see clearly. To understand that I deserve relationships that give as much as they take. To know that my worth isn't measured by what I can provide to others. Carolyn reached over and patted my hand. You always deserved that, sweetheart. The money just helped you see it. As darkness fell around us, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the shock of those matching numbers to the pain of rejection to the joy of creating something meaningful with my unexpected fortune. The money had changed my life, yes, but not in the ways I'd initially feared or hoped. It had simply given me the freedom to see clearly and choose wisely. The most valuable thing I'd gained had nothing to do with millions in the bank. It was the understanding that the people who deserve a place in your life are not those who are there when you have everything to give, but those who stay when you have nothing to offer but yourself. 2 years after winning the lottery, I was featured in a national magazine article about innovative nonprofit models. The journalist asked me what advice I'd give to other lottery winners. Tell as few people as possible, I said without hesitation. And before you tell anyone, find out who would care about you even if you had nothing. Those are the only people who deserve to know. Sounds like you learned that lesson the hard way, the journalist commented. The best lessons usually are, I replied. The article generated considerable attention, with several lottery winners reaching out to share their own stories. Many echoed the same themes: families torn apart by greed, friendships destroyed by entitlement, lives ruined by too much money and too little wisdom. But there were also stories of hope, winners who'd used their windfall to create meaningful change, who'd learned to recognize authentic relationships, who'd found that true wealth had nothing to do with dollars and everything to do with purpose. I joined a quiet network of lottery winners who'd managed to navigate their windfalls without losing themselves. We met occasionally, sharing strategies for maintaining privacy, protecting assets, and finding meaning beyond material wealth. At one such gathering, an older man named Frank shared his story. He'd won $80 million 15 years earlier and immediately told his entire extended family. Within 5 years, he'd been sued by 3 relatives, lost relationships with 2 of his children, and spent millions on legal fees defending himself against fraudulent claims. "The money didn't change them," Frank said. "It just revealed who they'd always been. I wish I'd known that before I told everyone." His words resonated with every person in that room. We'd all learned the same hard truth: money is the ultimate revealer of character, both in others and in ourselves. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the parallel universe version of myself, the Tori who'd excitedly announced her win to her family, who'd handed out money to every relative who asked, who'd learned too late that generosity without boundaries is just another form of self-destruction. I was grateful to have avoided that fate. My relationship with Carolyn had deepened into something transcendent, not just aunt and niece, but true family in every sense that mattered. She'd moved into a beautiful cottage near my home, where her garden flourished and her health continued to improve. Isabella had become more than a friend. She was my partner in the foundation, my confidant, and the sister I'd never had in Rachel. Together, the 3 of us had built something that would outlast us all, a legacy of compassion and community that touched hundreds of lives. My biological family remained peripheral, present at major holidays, polite in our interactions, but never truly close. I'd made peace with that reality. Some relationships simply aren't meant to be deep, and forcing intimacy where there's no foundation only leads to disappointment. On the 2nd anniversary of my lottery win, Carolyn, Isabella, and I celebrated quietly with dinner at my favorite restaurant. As we raised our glasses in a toast, Carolyn offered words that captured everything I'd learned. To the courage to see clearly, the wisdom to choose wisely, and the grace to build a life that honors who we truly are. To clarity, Isabella added. To freedom, I finished. As I clinked glasses with the 2 most important people in my life, I realized that winning the lottery had indeed changed everything, just not in the ways I'd expected. It hadn't brought me closer to my family. It hadn't made my life easier or simpler. It hadn't solved all my problems or answered all my questions. But it had given me something infinitely more valuable: the chance to see the truth about my relationships, the courage to honor my own worth, and the resources to build a life of purpose and meaning. The money was just money. The real prize was the clarity to use it wisely. Have you ever had to test someone's loyalty in your life? What did you learn from that experience? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons that might change your perspective. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by what they can give to others. Thank you for listening, and may you find the clarity to recognize the true relationships in your own life.